Here are some recollection of my college years, 1912, 1916. In the fall of 1912, September, I boarded the Albany night boat for Albany and Troy and went by train to Williamstown on the Boston and Albany. I was accompanied with Bill Moffett, a classmate at Poly, and he had a brother there named David. David met us at the railroad station and took us to Jessup Hall, where we registered, and then to my room at Courier Hall, and Bill to his room in Morgan Hall, and he was rooming with Dick Maynard, another Poly boy. There was open rushing for fraternities, which meant that you could bid a freshman at any time you could catch him. Dave had related the men at the Zate House that his brother and another Poly boy was coming up, and they invited me there for a date. I was looked over. I also was dated for Delta Psi, which Dick Maynard had a brother there, and Phi Gamma Delta. Jack Conway, another Poly boy, had a connection there. Well, I was bid Zate, I think the second day, and they pinned a little white button on me. My roommate at Courier Hall was Amory Skerry, and it had been arranged that I would room with him because his mother and my mother had been classmates at Packer. It was not too harmonious, a marriage. Amory subsequently dropped out in the end of freshman year and married an English girl. The first incident of any note outside of the bidding for a fraternity was the tug of war between the freshmen and the sophomores over the Green River. River only came to your waist, but the freshmen had one side and the sophomores on the other, and it was a tug of war. I've forgotten who won. Probably the freshmen. We had more in numbers. The next interclass contest was the nightshirt parade. We gathered at Western Field, and there was a bonfire, and we went, joined hands, the freshmen did, and circled the bonfire. All we had on beside our trousers was a shirt, not a nightshirt, just an ordinary shirt. And the sophomores joined hands and marched around, circled around in the opposite direction. At a signal from the upperclassmen, the sophomores tried to take our shirts, and the object was to keep your shirt, and the victor would be the class that had the most shirts. The other interclass contest was the cane rush. That came at a later time and spread over several months, quite complicated. Hope I can describe it well. Well, the object was for the freshmen to bring in canes, one for each member, wrapped in bags, within a certain circle around Greylock by 11 o'clock on a certain night. And the object was to get there in spite of the sophomores. And the sophomores would tried to prevent, and usually ended up in a contest, sometimes a little fisticuffs. Why it was so complicated was this. The cane committee selected would gather the canes which had been ordered in New York, and they were nice canes too, had a little silver top with a 1916 on it, and they were taken to a hotel in Pittsfield. And several weeks before the date set for the rush, they would be taken out and put on a farmhouse maybe a mile or two away from the campus. This had to be done secretly, and the sophomores would go out at night sometimes to reconnoiter, to see if they could find out where we held the canes. Well, when the night came, the cane committee went out to the farmhouse and strapped the canes to their backs. I think there were 6 of them in the committee, and surrounded by a guard, maybe a dozen of the Huskies would work their way back towards the campus. And there they would be met by the rest of the class and circled around them for offensive purposes, and marched towards the Greylock Hotel and the area in which they had to be held by 11 o'clock on that night. Well, it so happened, I think, that the sophomores got wind of this, but we were met down, I think, near Coalfield, maybe in Mission Park, and there we had the fisticuffs. But we were successful in bringing in the canes, and the freshman had his cane. There was 6 of us freshmen bid for Zeta Psi. Henry Flint of Munson, Stubby Flint, Frederick Geyer from Cincinnati, Fritz Geyer, John Marshall from Louisville, Kentucky, John, Bill Moffett from Brooklyn, Bill, Dudley Miller from Brooklyn, Dudley, Fritz Tompkins from New York City, Fritz, Schuyler Orbis from New York City, Schuyler. Schuyler dropped out at the end of his first term, and he too got married. The initiation ceremonies were not hazing as was in some colleges. It was more to impress the freshman with his spirit of brotherhood, and we would sit for half an hour rigid in a dark room with a candle on a table, and there look at the emblem of Zeta Psi and meditate on brotherly love. I ate my meals, as did the other members of the delegation, at the Zeta Psi house, walking from Courier Hall to the Zeta house, quite a distance. The Zeta house was on the corner of Main and North Street, and the walk was way down by the trolley cars. But you went up a nice row of elms, and in the summertime it was a pleasant walk. The table, the dinner table, we sometimes had to make it a song, and one of the upperclassmen would lead us in the Zeta Psi song, "On Chattanooga's bloody field, a prisoner left to die," so forth and so forth. Then each class had to sing a little jingle, and all the same tune with the class in it. Started out 13 is a jolly class, ball to roll, 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 roll. She never let the good time pass, ball to roll, 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 roll. Williams, 1913, ball to roll, 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 roll. Well, then 14 would take up. 14 is, and so forth, and then 15, and then the freshman. When it came the freshman turn, everybody booed. After breakfast, we'd go to chapel every morning. I think you're probably allowed 2 breaks a year or a semester. And you have to gather there for a short service, maybe 15 minutes, and the monitors are there to see that you're in your seat. From there you went to your first class, either in Jessup Hall or Grace Hall, and the subjects were Latin and mathematics and English, I think we called it rhetoric, and a science, probably biology in my case. I don't recall, but I believe also there was a modern language. German would be my guess. I failed the calculus, the only subject I ever failed. I tried out for the freshman baseball team at third base, but I didn't have a strong enough arm to get over to first base, and I dropped out after the first game. I remember John Marshall from Kentucky. His mother was a widow, but she came up and she had a Packard automobile, and we'd go take us for a ride. There were very few cars in those days, and of course none of the undergraduates were permitted to have a car. Usually on a Sunday afternoon, after chapel, we'd go for a walk, and the countryside at Williamstown is the place to go for a walk. Stone Hill nearby was a favorite spot, and there was one weekend where we all had to climb Greylock, which was the tallest mountain in the Berkshires. That was a day which was set aside for that purpose, Mountain Day. The nearest town was North Adam. It was a mill town, and there was a hotel there, name escapes me, and was connected by trolley, and from Williamstown, about a half-hour ride. And the consumer souls would go over there on a Saturday evening and sit in the tap room and sing songs and socialize, and come back by the trolley and socialize on the way home. After effects. And trolley arrived at the foot of what is known as Consumption Hill at Main Street, and you had a little bit of a walk. So that sobered people up, students up pretty well, going up Consumption Hill. Each class had their own class song, and then those were made into a melody, and those were the one that was sung mostly around the tap room. 1909 song was popular, 1910, 1914, and 1916. Of course, our class song didn't come along till the senior year, but we did sing the other class song, and it's very melodious too. I wish I could sing some of them. Number 10 comes back to me a little. Ye-ho, my lads, ye-ho, a fleet of 60 men. We're here today from many a port. We'll all be here again. Fill up the bumpers, trim the ship. It's 1910. There's a place, I guess you know, where we used to like to go and a table in the corner where the lager used to flow, and the rafters still re-echo till the class of 1912. Well, that trip home on the trolley car, and one time I think a little too triviality, they stopped at the president's house, the top of the hill, and serenaded the president of the college. Well, I think as a result of that, two of the men had to leave college. One of them was Jim Cathcart. He was a Z from St. Paul, Minnesota. Yeah, there were house parties, midwinter house parties, and the males would stay at the fraternity house. Men would move out, go down with one of the underclassmen, and one of the features, if the weather permitted, was sleigh ride. And it ran a large sleigh, and they'd get 10 or 15 of us, and we'd put on the jingle bells on the horses and ride around campus. Yeah, you could afford it. You could rent a horse and sleigh and take out your best girl for a sleigh ride. Drive with the left hand and hold her hand under the blanket with your right. The senior prom was the high social point of the year. None of the freshmen or sophomores attended, mostly seniors and juniors. And we made arrangements on a dance card for the dance, and you go around with your friends and fill up your date card. And they'd ask you who you're bringing, and if you said, I'm bringing my sister, why, largely they have their card all filled out. There were cut-in dances. You started the dance and then you could cut in. And if you got stuck with a girl, why, you usually signified that to one of your pals on the floor, on the stag line, and he'd come out in true brotherly fashion and take over. Nearby Troy, there was a girls' finishing school called Emma Willard School, and Alice Trowbridge, one of the girls at Boyder Woods, was a student there, and I went over with Lambert Wood, a friend of mine, and visited Alice and her friend, Van Murray. At luncheon, we only spent the day. We sat at the table, one large table, and Miss Kellis, headmistress, sat at the other end and kept careful watch. We didn't get much of a chance to visit alone. And returned home by train. My roommate at the Zaid House for junior and senior year was Frederick Geyer from Cincinnati. And he had two sisters. And he brought them up and introduced them around, and very successful. Both of them married Zaids. Helen, his oldest sister, married Stubby Flint, who was my closest friend at college and for many years thereafter. The other's name was Virginia, and she married Gil McCurdy from Rochester. Another Zaid. We had one year, I had a Christine Nichols from Summit to the midwinter house party. Very attractive because I saw very little of her. And there's one man who paid special attention to her. And when the bill for the came around for the house party expenses, I sent it to Act Banks. I was elected manager of the golf team, and Johnny Marshall was the captain of the team. I remember one time we went to play Yale, and I forgot where the course was, but when the tour time came, one of the Yale players was missing, and they were quiet about him. Soon he came up the driveway, and he was in his tuxedo. He had been out all night, and so he said, "Well, don't bother, boys. I'll start right the way I am." So he took his golf clubs and went out there with his tuxedo and teed off. A little bravado, I felt. I think he played a few holes and then defaulted. Our college rival was Amherst, and Amherst-Williams football game, climaxed the football season. When freshman year, my game was played at Amherst, and we went down by bus, a group of us, students, to cheer the team. Well, the team won. First time in 12 years that we had won on Pratt Field. And we celebrated in West Northampton and came home by bus. And I will remember the bus ride because I had to stop several times and ask if I could get off and take a leak. Fritz Tompkins, I mentioned before, another state was captain of the football team, and W. Flint was the manager. And we played Princeton opening game our senior year and resulted in a tie, which of course a victory for us. And the man who made the touchdown was Carlton Overton. He became a campus hero and was elected president of the class. Our permanent class president was Jim Garfield. He was a nephew of the president of the college and also of the president of the United States. I associate him most with the mock political convention we held in college. That was very interesting. We tried to follow as much as possible a national convention of the Republican Party. We had our platform, and we had our opening keynote address, and we had nominations and balloting. And I was in charge of the forces nomination of Elihu Root, and Jim Garfield put nomination for President Roosevelt, who was running on the Bull Moose Party. And the Republican candidate was Charles Evan Hughes, and he was subsequently nominated by the mock convention and the national convention. There was a society called Gargoyle, and it was composed of seniors and men who were prominent on campus, like the captain and manager of football and baseball and the editor of the review, and they were chosen by the outgoing class by a ceremony from the juniors. The juniors would sit on lab fence, at the fence along the part of the campus where the laboratories were, and they would be tapped. One senior gargoyle would go down the line and tap the man to be chosen by him, and the last man tapped was supposed to be the selected favorite, and the last tap for gargoyle was a high honor. It was modeled after the Skull and Bones at Yale. Senior year, a group of felt that was an undemocratic society, and they refused to be tapped. One of them was W. Flint, and Jim Garfield. Senior year, I was elected head of the House, State House, and the third term, that is the spring term, and there presided over the commencement gathering. Had a committee to help me, and our duty was to see that the parents and the guests were entertained properly. Rich guy, my roommate, fell in love his senior year, and he devoted a good deal of his time to writing letters, and sometimes he would draw paintings, put them on the wall, wouldn't explain to me what they were. He had a peculiar habit, and when he was walking, he suddenly would stop and take his right foot and scratch his left leg and put it down again. Just a nervous habit. Well, habit or not, he turned out to be successful president of the Cincinnati Milling Means Company and man of wealth. Going back a moment, I failed to mention how the cane rush really ended as far as the interclass contest was concerned, and that was our sophomore year. We got wind of where the canes were stored in the hotel in Pittsfield and went down there disguised as students of the freshman class, and we substituted some false canes for the real ones and took the real ones back and hid them around the college in the campus. So when the night came for the freshmen to go out, get the canes and bring them in, they opened the bag and no canes. In the meantime, we had assembled our class at Jessup Hall in preparation for the resistance to the canes, and it was announced there would be no fisticuffs. We had the canes. So we passed out the freshman canes there. Well, that wasn't quite bad, and the freshmen got very excited about it and demanded that they be given the cane. Well, I finally acceded and gave my freshman cane up to a freshman whose name was Aubrey Wright, and subsequently married Sue Drysdale from Montclair, New Jersey. The hat clubs were a part of campus life. They had fashioned after the German societies, and they were a German hat, round hat with a rim in the front. One class had red and the other class had blue. They were selected from the sophomore class by the then senior class. Well, the convivial group in the sophomore class would form two groups, and they would entertain the hat men of the senior class, and depending on how well they entertained them and how much they thought of them, the senior class would hand down their hats to the sophomore. This custom was later abolished soon after he left as being undemocratic. The student body was exclusively Anglo-Saxon. There was one black from the South named Logan, and he subsequently became a leader in the civil rights movement. And there were two Jewish faiths. One was Jake Stone, the other was Len Newborg. And they both ended up in Wall Street, partners in a successful brokerage firm. I was a cheerleader, and senior year I was the head cheerleader. I had a good voice and a nimble feet, and I could start at one end of the stands and go down along the line, one foot over the other, leading cheers. A long cheer for the team. Hip, hip, William, William, William. rough, 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 rough. William, William, team, team, team. Well, one of the memories of football was with the Amos team, and when the game was over, Amos would sing, "Oh Lord Jeffrey Amos was the soldier of the king," and so forth, and then we would sing "The Mountains," "Oh proudly rise the monarchs," so forth. Well, that was the ceremony, the end of each final game, and it was quite impressive as the noise floated over towards the Berkshire Hills. There was a professor of philosophy, old Pop Russell, and he would go to all the practices of the football team. He was an avid football fan, and it was said that no member of the football team ever failed his course. Another impressive recollection was the singing of the fraternity row after the meeting night, and they usually came the same for each fraternity. And when that was over, we would gather on the front porch and sing our fraternity song. And there were 5 fraternity houses along Main Street, and one would sing, then the other would sing, sometimes all together. And on a spring evening or fall evening, why, it's quite impressive to hear these songs from these manly voices. One of the recollections I'll never forget. Well, the long winter evenings after we'd finished our homework, usually about 10 o'clock, we'd gather down in the living room of the fraternity house around an open fire and sit on the couch and have a bull session. A bull session is just talk all about campus gossip, campus doings, and sometimes and frequently the girls. I remember particularly Hart Fessenden. He was a junior, and his father was the founder of the Fessenden School, a boys' school near Boston. He was a reserved, good-looking intellectual, and he last word on most matters intellectual. Senior year, we wore our cap and gown for the last term when we went to chapel. Also, custom that when you became a junior, you could wear corduroy pants. Well, not many people observed it, but there were a few. And so when you saw a man in corduroy pants, you knew he was a junior. That really wasn't necessary because the college was small enough so that you knew everybody, or practically everybody. Of course, the members of your own fraternity and your own class, but that included also your class below you and the class above you. So I could remember all their names and what their nicknames were. We headed, I think, 125, 130, and we graduated 99. And there are 3 of us are still surviving. I think the tuition and board at that time came for $1,000. The business section in Williamstown was known as Spring Street, just 1 block long, and it'd be the drugstore at one end, Eddie Dempsey's, and next to him would be a quick lunch counter, and there was a shoe store, and there was a clothing store, and then there was a stationery store that had a pool table, or maybe 2 pool tables, and that would be a gathering place for those who like to pool or play billiards, and I learned to play billiards. Across the street was the theater, and I made a motion picture house, and I didn't frequent it too often, and it wasn't as popular, I don't imagine, as maybe they are today. Of course, they were the silent movie, and I think the odor in the movie house was pretty stuffy, as I remember. There was a second-hand clothes dealer named George Ruddick, and he would go around the dormitories and calling out, "Any old clothes for George? Any old clothes for George?" Well, I don't know where they came from, but he seemed to make a living out of buying old clothes from the students. Oh, speaking of clothes, the Brooks Brothers with the soft shoulder was just being worn. They were expensive, and very few of us had them. I know Johnny Marshall had a suit. He's quite proud of it. He would turn back the flap, the lapels, throw his hands down the side to show how soft it was. Funny how little things like that stick in your mind. There are a few boys who were working their way through college, and the easiest way was to wait on table. In summary, as I look back, I was indeed fortunate. It was a country club existence in a large way. We lived in luxurious fraternity houses. The courses were not too hard, companionship agreeable, and the environment ideal. I will be eternally grateful to my father for making this possible, at sometimes at a sacrifice to himself. Pax vobiscum. This was recorded September 21st in my 97th year, my age.